Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar by the Association of Professional Sales on designing effective sales teams. My name is Ben Turner. I'm the General Manager of the APS, and really looking forward to a fantastic session this morning with Joe Keeler and Dr. Javier Marcos. We've got people around Europe, around the world joining us this morning, and I'd like to start off just by thanking you this morning for your time and your commitment to this session. Obviously, we understand that sales leaders and management members have busy day jobs and lives outside of the learning space. So to actually take some time on a Thursday morning to spend it with the association, with this webinar, to look to improve, to look for ideas to improve performance, is very humbling. So first of all, our massive thanks to you for joining us this morning on a busy day. I'd also like to thank Joe and Dr. Javier Marcos for their time this morning. It's a pleasure to have them present this webinar with us. Before I introduce Joe, just wanted to update you a few things on the APS itself. Obviously, we've had a fantastic week that many of you may have heard about in terms of now having approval of or provisional approval of our standard for a B2B sales degree apprenticeship. It's a fantastic step in the right direction in terms of the professionalism agenda and government recognising that sales as a profession and therefore a degree apprenticeship to help us with that. So we're really excited about that, and I'm sure members and people associated with the business will see more about what we've been doing there. Obviously, we're also a membership association. We've got most of the people on the call this morning are members. There's a few people that aren't, and hopefully you'll see the sort of quality we drive forward on these sessions, and enhances why members become members, and clearly why we hope those who are sampling and seeing what we're doing this morning will become members in the near future. So we look forward to getting your feedback and your thoughts throughout the presentation. Please post questions in the questions tab. Myself, Javier and Joe will look to pick those up as quickly as possible and address them at the right times. But we're interested in your thoughts and your questions, so please share them with us. So now I'll pass over to Joe. Joe is the managing partner at Belbin, and she'll be helping us with the hosting of this this webinar. Obviously, our colleague Javier Marcos is contributing to that. Javier's a fellow at Cambridge Judge Business School and Cranfield. I'm just trying to look at Cranfield University or Business School. So we're delighted to have them both on the call. Morning, Joe. How are you doing?
Morning. Very well, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting us this morning. I'm very much looking forward to this.
No problem at all. Well, look, Joe, I'm going to hand straight over to you if that's okay. And
Absolutely.
Joe, I think you're going to do a far better job than I have introducing Javier as well. So please, I'll hand over to you guys and really look forward to a session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and hello to everybody out there. So today we're really going to be looking at using Belbin team roles to increase sales effectiveness and improve customer relationships. Slight introduction so that you know who it is that's speaking to you. My name's Joe Keeler, and I am the managing partner at Belbin. I have been here since 2001 and joined in a marketing capacity. Before that, I've spent 6 years in the pharmaceutical industry in sales. So I used to sell drugs legally to doctors and professionals. Really have enjoyed my time with Belbin because you really are looking at people, you're looking at individuals, how they interact with one another and how teams perform. So it's a fascinating subject, which is why I've been here for so long and I'm now the managing partner. Javier's been working with us for many years, and I had the good fortune to actually bump into Javier when I was at Cranfield on a course, Cranfield School of Management, and at that time Javier was the senior lecturer in sales performance. And we already knew that Javier was doing some great work with Belbin, and we collaborated together to put together a document, a whole lot of research that is, we've got, which was really looking at the combination of sales effectiveness with Belbin team roles. So we are absolutely delighted that we have this, and we want to present that to you this morning. Javier, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that? I mean, you are the expert in sales, you a fellow of the Judge, fellow of Cranfield. Anything else to add?
Well, and you are the expert in teams, so we believe it's a powerful combination. Really, all I wanted to add is we are seeing an increase in the use of teams, not just not just customer teams, but also if you think about complex customer supplier relationships, theoretically they should act as a team, focused on a common goal. So what we find is that there is the need to enhance effectiveness, what I call across boundaries, so across the customer and the supplier organizations. But team effectiveness and team performance theory has not yet been fully applied to the context of sales. And that's the aim of our collaboration, and what we are looking forward to sharing with our colleagues from the APS is the work that we have done together over the last 3 years, and some of the emerging insights that will help those engaged in complex sales and working with customer teams become more effective in growing their sales and driving forward their businesses.
Excellent. So let's get started.
Yes, I'd like to start just by sharing something that we are all aware of, but to ensure that we start from the same point, which is the world of sales has changed in a number of ways. First, we are giving way to the traditional sale of a product or a discrete service, and we are seeing organizations increasingly selling bundles of products and services. And often, we're seeing products as vehicles or mechanisms to deliver a service. There's also an increasing polarization between transactional and relationship selling. So the upsurge of technologies and the internet have meant that organizations are now dealing with transactional customers with those platforms and having to redefine their structures to engage at what we call multifunctional, multi-level dynamic exchanges with complex customers. And that requires the use of several individuals working together as a team. And also the last trend is no longer being expert in your product or service what makes a difference. Customers are demanding that suppliers and sellers really understand their businesses and really link the features of their services and products to outcomes in their organizations and in their business. So there is a transition from product and service knowledge to what I call customer business insights. So against this background of transformation and change within sales, the question is, how do we make individuals to work together better? And as I was alluding to before, it's interesting that despite increased use of selling teams over the last few years, we see that there is still a scarcity of research and a lack of understanding as to how really teams perform well in the sales context. So what I'd like to do is, just before we delve into the details of the composition of teams and how teams can be defined and structured, just to look at some of the key benefits. So what should an organization or a sales leader expect from individuals who are working together as a team? First is enhanced learning. If you think about the traditional role of a salesperson or an account manager, they spend a large proportion of the time alone with clients and customers, which means that they have limited opportunities to receive feedback unless they have trustworthy relationships. Therefore, their learning may be constrained. And unlike other functions where feedback is constant, so if you're in, say, marketing, you will always be able to get insights about a report that you're writing or some data analysis just by asking the colleague next to you. But if you're in sales, if you are traveling in the customer premises, it's very difficult to have those insights. So when you have people working together, attending a sales meeting or engaging with a customer, you have that opportunity. The second is about knowledge creation. The best ideas come from combination of different viewpoints, different standpoints, and different views of the world. So when you get individuals in teams, the opportunities for new knowledge creation becomes more significant. And the third one is about self-efficacy. Individuals can support each other in a way that create the belief of growth opportunities, and importantly, the belief of the achievement of goal setting by joining collective efforts. So these are some of the softer or behavioral outcomes that you typically see in effective teams in sales. Now, the question is, and how about the performance and the firm level outcomes? The first one is customer satisfaction. It will be enhanced just by receiving creative responses to complex problems. And again, this typically comes from the interaction of different individuals. If we agree that relationships with customers are necessary but not sufficient, and that these relationships are becoming more complex, you have, no matter what you sell these days, you have to engage with not just the technical individuals in the customer organization, but you also have to make a financial business case. You have to be able to justify how your offering will impact employee engagement. That means that you will have to understand different functions and the implications of your offering across functions. And we know that the more senior you can get into the organization, not just from the users, but to the decision maker making levels, will enhance your position. So strategic relationships in the form of multi-level and multifunction interactions are best looked after and best catered for by teams. The third one is about capability to acquire and process market-related insights. We all have, in most markets, more information that we can manage, and information is power. So when you have the right individuals working together, the ability to identify and extract valuable insights is enhanced. And the last one, I think this is one that summarizes all the ones that we have mentioned before. When you get teams in the context of sales, the potential of creating value, particularly in complex selling context, is significantly enhanced. So overall, what we see is that by abandoning this idea of the lone wolf, so the person who goes and visits customers and engaging teams, sometimes virtual teams, we can find both behavioral and firm level and performance outcomes that no individuals can ever achieve alone.
Javi, I think what you've said there is perfect, and I actually saw this quote. I read an article just last week from the Farmer Times, and it sums it up really, is that the days of the one-size-fits-all national sales teams are somewhat numbered. They were saying how they position their sales representatives is going to have to change, and they are going to have to look at a different approach, because basically the area of sales is just getting far more complex. And it's quite interesting that people are starting to talk about teams. Here at Belbin, we've talked about teams for over 30 years, and the benefits of working as a team, and the rest of the world now seems to be catching up. It's just taking a little while. There's a lot of work that's going on at the moment. Ernst & Young have done some studies, have surveyed lots of organizations worldwide, and what they are talking about is the fact that the world is complex. And actually, it's teams who are going to be essential to be able to really deliver the solutions that organizations need. They go on really to say that it's not just that they need these complex solutions, they need to be competitive in the future. I mean, that the world is getting more competitive, and it's teams really that are going to be the solution here. Quite interestingly, Gallup is saying the same thing. Harvard came up with something, I think it was a couple of months ago, saying we need to look at teams. So not just from Belbin's point of view, the rest of the world really are noticing that complex world, complex problems cannot be solved by individuals. A team approach really is needed. There's a lot of communication about teams, but really what we just need to quickly go over here before we look at the team roles and the sales process is, what do we mean by teams and what actually makes an effective team? Very often people think about teams as in all wearing the same, jersey on the same sports team. People think about it as in the same department, or just the people that you can see around you in the office. But that's not what we're talking about here in terms of teams. Teams really should have a purpose. That there needs to be a reason why they're there. What are they there to achieve? What is their objective? Now, this purpose should be clear, communicated and understood by everybody within the team, and it's really not a great idea just to say, does everybody understand, and everybody say yes. It's always a great idea to get everybody to recite that purpose back to you to ensure that there really is clarity there. People should be part of a team due to the fact that they can contribute something unique. So it's not just to do with job titles, it's not just to do with seniority, it's to do with the contribution that they are making. So you're choosing people for what they bring to the team, and in this term we talk about behaviours. What is it that they are bringing to the team? And the next two factors really are shared, is because people are bringing, unique behaviours and unique strengths to the team. Having that in a hierarchy doesn't quite work. You want people to feel that they can interact, they can talk without being asked for their contribution. So to have a one person who's in charge of the team doesn't necessarily work. A shared leadership approach works really well, and we talk about shared leadership. It depends where the team is at the time as to being the best person to take that mantle. So whether or not you're in a technical phase, or whether or not you're in a selling phase, or a delivery phase, that leadership can change to ensure that the team is working to greatest effect. Now this last, that number 5 on the list is psychological safety is critical. Now we used to have the word trust here. Trust is important, because unless you feel that everybody else is pulling their weight within a team, you're not going to give it 100%. You're not going to contribute as fully as you should. We've called it psychological safety now because this is the phrase coined by Google, and Google themselves have done a lot of research, and they say that without psychological safety the team really isn't there and it won't really perform. Small enough to be productive. Very often we get phone calls in the office saying, can you help us with our team? We need to do some work with them, and we say how many people are in the team, and they will say 22. And at that point you say, well, is it really a team, or are we looking more at group and group psychology here? So small enough to be productive is very key. Again, other people are beginning to wake up to this. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, has what he calls the 2 pizza rule. And this is a case of, well, if he sees more than 2 pizzas going in to a team meeting, he knows that there's too many people involved. So it needs to be small so that it can be agile. A lot of talk about agile teams at the moment. Really, what is this saying? So I'll press the wrong button now, I do apologise. This is saying really that teams need to be put together with care. It really, as teams are going to be so critical for the future, you need to start really thinking about them and how you're going to be putting them together. As Meredith Belbin says, that simply putting together a number of people and expecting them to work as a team is really not enough. And we have responsibility not only to the outcomes and the objectives, but we have the responsibility to ensure we're getting most out of those individuals and that they are performing to their best. A lot of work about employee engagement, about people playing to their strengths, and this is what we're really looking to do within a team. So what our team was, I've said that we've been around for about 30 years, and the whole Belbin team role theory, for those who aren't aware, has been around since the 1960s. Research done at Henley Management School saying what makes a team effective, why do some teams succeed and why do some fail. And what they found was that there are 9 distinct clusters of behaviour that are required for a team to be truly successful. Each of these clusters of behaviour was called a team role, and there's 9 of them, and a team role can be described, can be defined as a tendency to behave, contribute and interrelate with others in a particular way. It's an interesting, when you talk about team roles and having people within a team, what you're looking at really is diversity, and very often we talk about diversity in so many different ways, whether or not it's age, gender, so on and so forth. What we're looking here very much is looking at diversity of behaviour. So in a way you're putting all of those other things to one side and saying, how are these people behaving? But what is behaviour? Let's just talking about it here. See what we have. And then you have your personality. And this is very measured like what we have is very much how you behave, what you actually do, how you come across to others. So you can see interaction, and then it sticks to your personality and your DNA, but it is able to change depending on the team you're working with, that's managing response. It's really looking, I'll hand over to Javier now, so he can really look at how these 9 team roles, the whole concept of behaviour, can really link in with the sales process to increase sales effectiveness.
Thank you, Joe. And I think it would be best to, before we start delving into how specific individuals can genuinely contribute, to specific sales processes, to actually define those sales processes, because they may look different, in different organizations. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes revisiting the traditional way of defining sales processes, and also to provide a more modern view of these processes. So traditionally, you look at sales from, you start with prospecting and finding new customers, then you prepare your interactions with these customers, and then you try to specify how you will approach and open interactions with these customers, leading to some exploration of needs, which then allow you to present offerings that are relevant to the customer. The customer will put forward some objections that, hopefully, if you have been able to manage them, will allow you to start closing and then following up on those opportunities. And then it goes back to prospecting. Now, I'm just going to redefine these processes based on some of the changes and transformations that we have described at the beginning. The first, before looking for new customers, it seems to me a good practice to look at your customer portfolio and exhaust all the opportunities and possibilities to cross-sell. So I tend to call customer management the traditional prospecting phase. The second one, when you prepare a sales interaction, a sales meeting, the traditional pitch, the first question to ask is, what did we learn from this customer or from similar customers in the past that will enhance our chances to make this a meaningful interaction? Then, in most cases, in these days, it's ever so difficult to establish new relationships. Therefore, I argue that the key and the art is in developing 16 ones. The traditional way of looking at needs in the customer sometimes does not work because customers may not be aware of the opportunities and the needs that they have. Therefore, I'd like to use the notion of whatever you sell, in most cases, will help the customer achieve some goals. So, and in achieving those goals, there will be some change. So I like to frame this as a process by which you help the customer surface the barriers and enablers to their change agenda. Presenting is about linking the capabilities of the supplier with the opportunities identified in the previous phase. So instead of the traditional pitch or the presentation, I like to think about the way in which you link your capabilities as a supplier with the customer needs. Then the objections is, in my view, the process of identifying and addressing complex problems. So it's about complex problem solving rather than just justifying why your product or service has a better performance than somebody else's. Closing, in my view, when you close an agreement, you are actually starting to really deliver what you promise. So it's really when you start adding value. And that means that I often see the close or the closing as the starting point of the real test of a supplier's capabilities. The follow-up is about innovation. Once you have started delivering a product or a service, the question should become, how do I make this better? How can I increase the value that I have already provided to the client? And then that takes us back to the first step. So assuming that this reflects to some extent how your organization conceptualizes sales processes, what I'd like to do now with you, Joe, is to try to think, how does Belbin team roles theory eliminate the behaviors that drive these processes forward? One of the key debates that we have in sales is that sales cycles are becoming longer. So this cycle that we have on our screen is becoming ever more protracted and longer in most sectors. So a key question, and something that sales leaders are primarily interested in, is how do I shorten and how do I make each of these processes more meaningful for the customer and indeed for the supplier. So let's look at those behavioral traits, those tendencies to behave in a particular way, and see if we can gain some insights to accelerate and to make these processes more effective.
No, perfect, Javier. Let's do that. So now some of you may have your reports, some of you haven't, just to let you know that that's still available to you after the webinar. So if you've got your reports, it may be worth looking at them now as we go through each of these team roles. Now, the first of these team roles we're going to talk about, one of these team role behaviours, clusters of behaviours, is that of a plant. Now, plants, well, before I start that really, just to say that each of these team roles very much has a strength and what we call now a weakness. What we say is that if you're going to be great at something, if you're going to have a real strength, something might have to give. And we don't necessarily want to correct that weakness, but we need to be aware of it and make sure it doesn't have too much of a negative impact. So with plants, they are great at problem solving. They relish the idea of a really difficult problem so that they can come up with what we'd call a perhaps out of the box idea. They generate ideas all of the time. Not all of their ideas are very good, but there are gems there. You're not expecting those ideas to be fabulous, but you know that one of them will be. They are quite unconventional. They don't agree to the norm. They don't follow everybody. They are the ones who really are quite unique in the way that they look at life. However, because they are always, thinking of new ideas, they're always thinking of solutions, they can't necessarily always communicate particularly well. And I think we've all met people like this who are so busy with the ideas that are going on, is that they just cannot find those words to be able to communicate to us lesser mortals. And they can get quite preoccupied with their thoughts. So you have to treat them with care, you have to draw them out quite carefully. But really, these are fabulous people at looking at creativity and innovation. So Javier, where would you see the plant behaviours within your sales cycle?
Well, if you think about the plant, the way they think is very often unorthodox. So they are uniquely positioned to think of ways in which customers can use products and services in different ways to create more value. So at the very beginning, they have a role to play. Then when it comes to what we call exploring needs, or surfacing the barriers and enablers to change in the customer organization, plants are apt to conceptualize and imagine possibilities. They are very good at providing an articulation of new ways in which customers can develop their own businesses. And when it comes to managing objections and complex problem solving, plants will almost always creatively respond in new ways in how to address the customer objections and complaints.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great, Javier. And also, we've just got a question, sorry, a bit of delay in answering it, about the role that perhaps AI will play in gathering customer insights and offering valuable data to help the sales process. And I think the best person or the best behaviour to ask, where could they put that, or how can they vote, would be that plant behaviour. They'd be the people who would very much be able to see, okay, this is our standard sales process. What can we do differently? What's the new technology out there? Let's look at things differently. So perhaps this would be the best behaviour to ask that question, actually, about how artificial intelligence is actually going to help there. Let's go on to the next behaviour, and that is very much that of the monitor evaluator. Now, monitor evaluators are those people who take a strategic long-term view about things. They like to have all of the available information in front of them, and they like to weigh up the pros and cons and make the best decision possible based upon that. You could say that they have they're immune to enthusiasm, And this is because they take all of the emotion out of the decision-making process. They're not going to be drawn at all by their heart. It's a head-based process. They are thinking constantly about the best option. They are, unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, it's fortunate, I suppose, for everybody else, but they're always right. You know those people. So they are there taking a seat back, perhaps away from the team, not joining in everything else that's going on around them, because they are too busy weighing up the pros and cons. Now, because they have this immunity to enthusiasm, they can sometimes lack a little bit of drive. They don't like to be rushed. They like things to be done properly, not quickly. And they can be not the most inspirational team roles there. And sometimes they can be seen as overcritical. They have a habit of saying no. And sometimes people won't ask them their opinion because they know that a no may be coming. But however, that's quite dangerous to do that, because really these people need to be listened to make sure that strategically you're making the best decisions possible. So quite crucial, I should imagine, in the sales process, Javier.
Indeed. If you think about, again, one of the key difficulties that leaders of sales organizations have is when developing their businesses and their markets is how you target specific customers. And there is a tendency and to try to chase as many customers and as many opportunities as possible. And we have now evidence, from empirical studies that it's actually less is more. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality of targeting and then resourcing those opportunities. So monitors evaluators are typically very good at discerning and in a highly systematic and unbiased way, determining which opportunities are worth pursuing. Also, when it comes to planning and articulating the objectives of sales meetings, monitor evaluators are particularly good at evaluating past deals, what went well and what did not. So if you have, for instance, some data in your organization, if you do the post-mortem reviews, as we sometimes call them, monitor evaluators will be very good at identifying the real reasons why past deals didn't succeed.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Some people are saying they can't. I do apologise for that. We are looking into it. The next team role is that of a specialist, and a specialist is a behaviour which has a real love of learning. They love the in-depth knowledge about a particular subject. You can often tell the specialist due to the fact that they have lots of letters after their names and they have lots of certificates on their walls, and they have quite a narrow contribution to make, but it's a very deep contribution to make. So these people are ones who don't actually have a job because they love what they do and they don't have perhaps those defined lines between home and work. But, everything is one for them. They absolutely love what they do. Very often you can tell specialist behaviour when you ask them what you think is quite a simple, straightforward question, and you're still there half an hour later listening to the answer, and that answer is incredibly technical. They can sometimes dwell on these technicalities and need to be careful that they don't lose people because of their depth and the way that they go into this. Javier, how would you put the specialist into the sales process?
Good question. I think the specialists have a unique contribution to make when things get difficult. At the stage of problem solving or managing objections, very often they will bring those insights that will convince the customer of the goodness of a particular solution. They are very good at identifying elements of the offering that can make the difference, and they are able to justify from a technical and a professional standpoint why your offering is superior to somebody else's. So I think that's the phase in the sales process where a specialist can make the best contribution.
Okay. Now, with the 3 team roles that we have spoken about so far, I mean, and there's 9 of these behaviours. I don't know if I can throw a question out there that we've spoken about the plants who are the very creative thinkers, new ideas. We have the monitor evaluators who take all the information and work out the pros and cons. And we have the specialists who really have that in-depth knowledge. Is there anything, does anybody think that these three team roles might have in common? Would anybody like to give it a shot? You know, what are those three team roles? What are the similarities? Javier, do you have any idea? Should we ask you?
Well, if I reflect on these three roles, you know, we've been talking about primarily the way they think and the way they analyze. So I'm tempted to think that the one thing that these three roles have in common is the fact that they are all based in cognitive abilities. So these seem to me to be you know, thinking roles.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. All of these people, a good example of the type of all of these three team roles tend to have quite a high IQ if you're going to be dealing at that type of level. So yeah, absolutely, we call those the thinking roles. So those three are all to do with the head, or to do with cognitive thinking. So let's go on to the next three team roles here. And here we have the resource investigator, what we call the Tigger of the team roles. Perhaps what you see as the more traditional salesperson role is you have people who are very outgoing, enthusiastic. They seize opportunities, and they know people who know people who know people. They have Twitter, LinkedIn, and everything else, and they are great at connecting people together. They are brilliant negotiators. They're great at dealing with people. They really do explore what other people can bring to the party, and what they're great at is really unleashing out into the world and seeing what they can come back with, because they bring ideas back to the team. Now the plant brings ideas, they're new ideas. What the resource investigator does is brings stolen ideas back to the team. So they look at, see what other people are doing, and then bring those back to see how they can be developed. Now, because they're very outgoing, you don't tend to see them in the office much, and they tend to have a lot of things on the go at one time. They can be slightly over optimistic about these opportunities, and sometimes they do get bored, and in fact they do get bored quite easily, so they will tend to have lots of different things on the go. So this really is the team role, behavioural resource investigator. Actually, can we just go back here? Somebody says to those three at the beginning, the plant specialist and monitor evaluator, it says independent, and that's a really good statement there, Colm, is that yes, those three you could say are independent because they are there as individuals working things out in that brain of theirs, so they can be independent from the team and be drawn about their contributions brought in as and when required. So I think that's great. So if we have any prizes, I think that would go to you. Right, sorry, resource investigator, Javier, how would you see that in the sales process?
I'm sure that our audience will have guessed that they are particularly well positioned to develop relationships. That's the very nature of the role. So resource investigators are characterized by being outgoing and enthusiastic, therefore they typically make up excellent relationship builders. Also, they're very good at the presenting stage, or when linking the supplier capabilities with the customer needs, by connecting conversations across boundaries. So typically, when you have a purchasing team comprised by procurement officers, maybe some functional officers like HR or marketing or IT, they are very good at connecting those conversations. And just before we go on, I'd like to address one of the questions that we had from one of our participants about customer insights. How would you go about this? Well, I would think that when data is not readily available, and when you need that customer insight information, resource investigators are good at collecting and identifying where that data can exist. Then monitor evaluators will play a good role in filtering and identifying the data that is really relevant. And as we may see later, there's another role that will help out in ensuring that the insights that have been derived are actually acted upon. So just to, to look at that question that we had, I think the resource investigator is the right person to search for sources of data, and then the monitor evaluator is the right person to select the right data sources and the right data sets.
Perfect. And actually, it's an interesting one when you look at those two, because they are quite different team roles. We'd call them team role opposites. And actually, how you manage that interaction between both of them is quite key to make sure that they both feel that they are adding to the team. Let's go on to the next team role now, which is that of coordinator. The coordinators are the conductors. They know what the piece of music is meant to sound like, and they bring each instrument in to ensure that it sounds as it should. They are fabulous at delegating, and they are the ones that really see, identify and use the talent of those around them. They're quite mature, they're quite calm, you don't see them flapping. They are always saying, hang on a minute, let's go back, let's revisit the objective, what is it we are here to achieve? So they're always clarifying and looking at the big picture. Coordinators are big picture people. Like I say, they do delegate very well, but sometimes you do wonder whether or not they're delegating everything and what they're actually doing with their feet up on the table drinking another cup of tea. And sometimes they can be seen as rather manipulative, in as much as why have they asked that person to do that thing. So there are some weaknesses there, but it doesn't matter as long as the strengths really are there. Coordinator is sometimes seen as in a project management role, who manages to bring everything together. Javier, how would a coordinator fit within your sales process?
We talked about the difficulty of surfacing customer needs and how sometimes customers are not able to articulate their needs and opportunities. I believe that coordinators will be adept at motivating people to talk, therefore making explicit hidden needs and possibilities. Also, if you think about the innovation and follow-up processes, coordinators will typically be best able to ensure that a harmonized and a coordinated approach to deal with the customer is adopted, and that new potential innovations follow the delivery of agreed solutions. So they have that coordinating, as the name suggests, coordinating role that will ensure some consistency in service delivery.
Yeah, perfect. Now, we've got another question that's come up, but I'd like to just, if that's okay, to take that after the next team role, because we're doing these team roles in threes. So the next team role here we have is the team worker, and the team worker really is that gel, the oil that keeps that team together. They are fabulous at listening. I mean, the coordinators are great at listening, but the team workers listen because you're a human being, and they're the ones who realise that we all have our own thoughts, feelings, and all of those really are also, we take them to work. They're incredibly diplomatic. They have a great deal of empathy, and very often with team workers, you don't realise that what they're bringing to the team until they're not there. And then sometimes you find that the team just doesn't quite function, it doesn't flow, it feels like it's jarring, and that's because the team worker brings so much to the team. They can be quite indecisive. They don't like to take sides because they want to agree with everybody, so don't ask them to make a decision in a large group of people. Make sure it's on a one-to-one. They also avoid confrontation. Again, it's that personal aspect, but paradoxically, they are brilliant in actually averting friction, and this is because although they don't like confrontation, what they can do, especially perhaps you've got a cross person talking to them, is they are able to bring the energy levels down by using expressions such as, I understand where you're coming from, and yes, I'm listening, and oh, that must have been awful, or words to that effect. They really can bring down any hostility or any conflict. So really, really invaluable. Javier, how would you use team workers?
I would argue that relationships that matter, so those strategic supply customer relationships, will almost always have tensions, contradictions, and difficulties just by the very nature of those relationships. And in those contexts is where team workers can make the most meaningful contribution. they can become instrumental in ensuring that customer requests and demands are listened and attended to. They can also empathize with the other party in a way that will seek to avoid unnecessary conflict and indeed seamless resolution when it does emerge. So they have that fundamental contribution to make when things don't go as planned, or when objections and problems emerge in the relationship with the client or the customer.
Absolutely, that's that listening ability that they have, isn't it, which is so crucial when you're dealing with those customers. Now, we've just looked at the resource investigator, the coordinator, and the team worker, and again, these three team role behaviours have something in common. And the thing that they have in common here is that they all deal with people. They are all interested in people. The resource investigator is more interested in what that person can give for them, what they can get out of that relationship. The coordinator is interested in people as what that they can contribute to the team, and the team worker is interested in the well-being of each individual there. So really are what we would call the social roles. Now, a question that's come in is, do people know what role they are, and does this present its own challenges? That's a really, really good question. The only way really of finding out which of these team roles you have strengths in is you fill in a questionnaire, which is the link that we sent out to everybody before this webinar. And we're not just one role. We don't put ourselves in boxes here. We have strengths in all of these roles, it's just we have more strengths in some rather than others. And what we would expect is that most people have strengths in what we'd call 3 of these team roles. And by understanding those strengths and being able to use the language of Belbin actually allows you to say things like, right, at this point I need to put my team worker hat on, or I'm taking that hat off now because I need to be in one of my other strengths, which may be that of a plant. So in a way, it's a real benefit to understand your strengths before you start any team work, because you can ensure that your strengths are allocated to the right parts of the project. Now, one thing we do also say is that just by finding out what you think your strengths are is only half of the story. It depends very much on your level of self-awareness and understanding. And so what we do at Belbin is we recommend strongly that people get feedback from other people. And you can do this, you can ask your customers, you can ask people that you deal with in a key account situation, is what behaviours are they seeing and valuing? And once you ask them these questions, you really get a wonderful report back that says not only how you see yourself, but how other people see you. And this is the crucial part, because this is the validity of the tool, is saying, how are other people seeing those strengths? So thank you for that question. Yeah, people aren't just one role, they have about three roles they can work very strongly in.
Yes, and just to provide an episode that revealed to me the power of understanding your own role and the role of those who you interact closely. The context was, a few years ago, I was asked, and I was part of a team trying to intervene in a very complex relationship in the aerospace industry. So we went through a process of understanding expectations of both parties, and at some point we realized that it was down to some key individual interactions that were holding the relationship back, that were really impeding this partnership to flourish. So after we did the diagnosis, we came up with this notion of 2 companies, 1 team, and we invited them to fulfill their team roles. We realized that some of those very few highly difficult relationships were from individuals that have a very distinct team roles. What this allowed them to do was to understand where each other was, was coming from, and that had a profound positive effect in then restoring the relationship and therefore some of the partnership processes. So the power of understanding, the awareness of your tendency to behave in a particular way, as we define, and if you couple that with your awareness of how others tend to behave, is an approach that can have profound positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you, and keep the questions coming because that's what makes this webinar more useful to everybody. So let's just look at those last 3 team role behaviours now. The first one we will look at is shaper. The shapers are very challenging, dynamic, and they love overcoming obstacles. They are very focus driven, they're very objective driven, and all they care about is getting to the end goal, to getting to the result. They have high energy, but they also have high anxiety and that's what keeps them going, that's what keeps them pushing all of the time. Sometimes they can offend people, and this is because it's not about the individual to them, it's about getting to that objective, getting to that end point, to ensure that time isn't lost, that money isn't lost. So they really are the drivers, I would say, within any team. Javier, quite a few of these people tend to be sales, would you say, or whereabouts would you put these in the sales process?
Very often you find salespeople with a clear shaper in themselves, which is good. Shapers have the ability to bring things to a close, so they are uniquely positioned to help towards the end of the sales process, to gain commitment and to agree. Now, I also need to point out when we talk about that traditional view of the salesperson as a pushy and aggressive individual, that typically is a shaper using the shaper characteristics at the wrong time, typically at the beginning or the middle of the process rather than the end. But let's be clear here. Once you have followed the steps that we have alluded to before, customers will expect the providers and the suppliers to move things forward, and shapers are very well positioned to make that happen towards the end of the process.
Perfect. Now on from the shaper, let's go to the completer finisher. These are people who also have a high level of anxiety, and their anxiety is because they need to get everything perfect. These are the people who dot the I's and cross the T's. I would say they never really finish, actually, because they're constantly trying to make it better. So I'd say a polisher would be a better way of describing them. They are, well, they're just fastidious. They will ensure that everything is correct. They don't like the slapdash. They also don't like to delegate to anybody else because they're worried that nobody else will see those errors and will do as good a job as them. So sometimes they can get slightly overworked, and you see a completer finisher occasionally as the one who's got sort of the antacid and the Zantac by the side of them because of that anxiety to ensure that perfection is there at all times. So quite crucial, Javier, in perhaps putting proposals together, making sure that documentation going out to customers is of the highest quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I had, in my last role, I had an individual in the team who was a clear completer finisher, and that's the person that we all, went for. Before sending a proposal to a client, is the person who looked at those proposals to ensure that they were free from errors, that they were consistent, and so on. Also, the completer finishers are good towards the end, in terms of ensuring that the agreed contract and the service level agreements, are actually being delivered. So they have also a role to play at that stage.
Perfect. And then the last team role, so not the last, just the fact it's the last on the slides, is that of implementer. Implementers are fabulous at organising. So the coordinator organises the people and the implementer organises the work. They're wonderfully practical, they're very reliable. They sometimes have a slight fetish for Excel documents and Gantt charts and sticky pads and different colours, and because they are just so organised. They're the people who say, for crying out loud, can we stop talking about another idea and can we just get to do something? Let's turn all of these ideas into something tangible. Let's get the work done. They are incredibly hardworking. They are people who do stuff for the benefit of the company, and they're not doing it for any personal glory. So they can sometimes be a little bit slow to respond to new possibilities, a bit inflexible, because they have a process that they like to stick to, a process that they like to see out. So you do need to ensure that if any change is happening, that you involve them before the change so that they can actually plan any change for you. Implementers are crucial. In fact, I wish I knew more about this when I was a sales rep, because this is something that I personally lack. And although I was great at going out and forming those relationships, my and this is in the days of when we fill things in and paper and pencil and put them in the post. I wish I had more of this, because I really couldn't do the paperwork, and it did let me down a lot, I know. Javier, how would they fit?
Well, implementers will take a structured approach to deliver prototypes or proofs of concepts. These are the individuals that will typically ensure that the ideas brought about by the plans, for instance, in earlier stages of the process are translated into the proposals that you present to clients. And for instance, when suppliers are operating within a tight time frame, for instance, they actually can become instrumental in bringing together the right components of the offer, like the specification of outcomes, budgets, timescales, key milestones, and so on. And also, if you think about in the closing and adding value stage of the sales process, implementers can make a meaningful contribution by ensuring that the agreed next steps are taken and executed. Sometimes, when you have complaints from customers, they can also be very useful in ensuring that the agreed response to the customer is rolled out, and therefore to restore customer confidence.
Yeah, absolutely critical, as all these 9 team roles are. Now, those last 3 team role behaviours that we looked at, that of the shaper, the completer finisher, and the implementer, the one thing that they all have in common is they're very, very action orientated. They are ones that really are doers. So the shaper is doing by getting everybody to the objective, the completer finisher is doing by ensuring that everything is correct, and the implementer is doing by the fact that they are organising that work. So really you have social roles, thinking roles, and action roles, and these are the 9 team roles that are being, and the language of this is used throughout the world. Organisations use Belbin on a regular basis to ensure that their teams are as successful as possible. And we're delighted really now that we have worked with Javier over the last 4 or 5 years to make that connection very much with sales teams to be able to do that. What would you say, Javier, what would you suggest that people do next? Now that we've gone through each of the team roles, we've gone through the sales process, would you say really people should look at their reports that they have hopefully done, and the ones that they can continue to do, and see perhaps personally where they fit within that sales process, get them to start thinking about different people and how they may interact? Do you think that would be a good step to start this, stop it from just being a webinar and to make it slightly practical?
Yeah, absolutely. I would strongly encourage and invite people to spend just 10 minutes completing the self-perception inventory to have an insight about how they typically behave when working with others. And if they have strategic relationships that they really want to see flourishing, I would invite them to encourage those clients and customers to do the same in a way of forming these cross-organizational teams. I also want to address a question about diversity that was put forward before. And what about diversity? Well, what we know from the original research that Meredith Belbin conducted was that those teams that show consistently higher performance are those that are diverse. So I see diversity in two senses. First, the traditional gender, age, ethnicity, but also I see diversity as a behavioral or even a mindset trait. So the argument and the response to that question is, if you have diverse teams and if you are able to balance those contributions, the chances of higher performance are really more significant. And the other thing I would do, answering your question, Joe, is I would invite people to listen carefully as to how individuals present themselves. Let me just give you a quick anecdote. I have been privileged to work in real sales interactions with account managers and sales executives, from over the years. And I remember working with a particular account manager from a technology company who had who lost a contract, and he said to me, I've done everything I was supposed to be doing. So I specified and presented a very detailed rollout. I described how the interface and other technical components would work. I presented a risk and a contingency plan. There was a very detailed and itemized budget, and I didn't win the contract. And my reflection, having seen this account manager interact with the two key decision makers in the client organization, I said to him, everything you've said seems to me to have the traditional elements of an implementer. That's attention to detail, but how about the big picture? Have you sufficiently laid out how this new platform will allow your client to do things with their own customers that they haven't been able to do before? So there was a very clear situation where it was an implementer talking implementer type of language to a plant, and obviously there was a disconnect, and that, in my view, was one of the contributing factors for not succeeding in that particular opportunity. So the answer to your question is raising your awareness and using this in the interaction with your colleagues in your organization and with the colleagues in the customer organization will help have more meaningful conversations that will lead to more meaningful actions, which altogether will bring about higher sales effectiveness. So there's really something here to explore, and I hope that Belbin will give our audience a lens, a new way of looking at sales processes from a behavioral standpoint that can complement some of the commercial considerations they need to take into account.
No, that's great. And if you want to continue this conversation, Javier and I will be at the Sales Innovation Expo at Excel next week. So please do come along. Or if you just want to chat to us, phone number's there. If you want to join us for a day to work out how you can practically do this with your sales process and your sales teams, we do have a course which going on in May in central London. So there are lots of ways for you to explore this. I've done a lot of research on LinkedIn and other places about what makes a perfect salesperson, and the responses is that actually they need to be brilliant in each of those 19 roles, and unfortunately that's just not possible. Or if it is possible, you'll be paying somebody one heck of a high wage. So really, when it comes down to it, is that we expect far too much from one person, but actually, if we look at a team really can be effective. So nobody's perfect perhaps, but a team can be. And remembering that what Meredith said there is that we need to put those teams together, and we need to be responsible for making sure that those teams work. Okay, I'd like to say thank you because I enjoy working with you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add before we leave?
Likewise, just if participants are interested in the work that we did, there's a report available. And indeed, all I would like to add is that behind the numbers that we all seek to have, so behind the growth of our businesses, there's always a story about people working together. And our invitation to our participants today is to explore that story behind those numbers. And indeed, we wish everybody good luck. And indeed, those who haven't had the opportunity, invite them to take on the sales perception inventory to know a little bit more about how they can work more effectively with their own teams and with the customer teams. And likewise, Joe, it's been a pleasure joining you on the APS today. I look forward to speaking to you and our participants sometime soon.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, both Joe and Javier, and thank you very much to all the participants that have joined us this morning. As usual, we look forward to your thoughts and your feedback both during but also after these webinars. So please, we'll look to pose any questions to Joe and Javier over the next few days. But again, I just wanted to reflect and say a massive thank you to both Joe and Javier. I've been writing my notes furiously as well, making sure that we're covering that both internally and how we speak to our customers. So thank you for your contributions. And of course, the other call to action from us personally is hopefully you're seeing just how the level of quality that we drive in our webinars and our content and our interactions generally. Those of you who've joined us who are members, this hopefully is another reflection of why and what value we place to membership. And also those who are looking to join, and I use the words looking to join, of course, but we look forward to that discussion with you over the next few days. Thank you for spending the time with us this morning. We wish you a fantastic rest of your day. And Joe and Javier, an absolute pleasure to hear your content. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.